set the ball rolling, does anyone have any initial thoughts on the challenges raised by communication with the public during this period? Okay, Danny. Danny.
Hello, how are you doing? So I'm Danny Carden at Ramblers Scotland, for those who don't know me.
Okay.
I think in many ways it's the same challenge we've had for like a number of years when I've been attending like LAF discussions related to comms on this, but it's like the same challenge but on steroids, where we're trying to get the audience that we don't necessarily have within our existing audiences within our groups, but then because we've got so many beginners, it's become a race to work out who these people are and then how we can actually get our messages in front of them. So that's felt particularly challenging, and I feel like it remains the challenge is, can we meet the pace of change with all these huge numbers of new beginners, and how can we in some ways stop doing exactly the thing we've been doing for a long time. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone, and speaking to our existing audiences, having the right messages and all looking great, but actually not getting to people who are going to be those who want to do the right thing but don't necessarily know how. So I think that, like, for me, it remains one of the biggest comms challenges.
Yes, thanks, Danny. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that. I think yes, certainly the existence of this new audience is something that's come through very strongly in the monitoring that we've done of people's use of the outdoors during COVID, and we are trying to reflect that as far as we can in the campaigns that are taking place, certainly in Scotland. Susanna Jones, I think you've got your hand up. Would you like to chip
Thank
in?
You, Mark. Yeah. Hi, I'm working in the Brecon Beacons National Park. Increasingly, we're having requests from on-the-ground staff for signage, visitor messaging signage in car parks. It's great to see that you've been doing sort of campaigns, social media campaigns. I think we need to be doing all of it, but I'm quite interested to hear how others are just sort of dividing up their resources. Are people still using temporary signs? Are they incorporating visitor messaging within car park welcome points? What different mechanisms are people using, and how much time are you investing in each different type?
Okay, Emma, sorry, you've got your hand up. Is this a related issue, or?
It is really, yes. In that we're currently doing a piece of work. I work for Snowdonia Active, but we're currently doing a piece of work for the Visitor Safety Group, looking specifically at communication of messages and hazard communication, safety communication in the outdoors. And what we're currently looking at is how we assess what information needs to be targeted at which points in the visitor journey prior to arriving on site. It's no good telling somebody which walking boots to wear once they get to the car park, because they're going to go in their flip-flops if that's what they've got on their feet at the time. So if you can bring that information prior to them arriving on site, a point at which they can action it, then so much the better. So what we're trying to do is to identify where the pinch points are at which we can influence people in that visitor journey, analyse the various different routes that different audiences and activity types will take to arrive on site, and the points in that. And then once you get to the site, I mean, we're all very aware of the multitude of signs that often greet you at the entrance and points into sites and at the head of trails. If we can then assess which are the key bits of information we have to give at those points and take everything else away, and then look at how we do it effectively. And we're doing a big literature review on the ways in which signage is most effective. And that's a sort of multi-sectoral approach, looking at hazard signage in the food industry and various other disciplines, to try and then work out, once you get to that point on the destination, how you most effectively communicate that information to avoid sign blindness. So it's a big bit of work, and that will come to an end in October of this year. So a little bit late for this season, but hopefully will inform going forward for next year and longer term.
Thanks, Emma. Yes, I think and just to chip in, I suppose, from a Scottish perspective, we've been taking a fairly broad brush approach to messaging, using lots of different channels. So the national messaging has been focused primarily on both social media and using traditional media to get messages out. But signage locally does also have a key role, and that's something which I guess has tended to be more the lead area for individual local management bodies. And it's not something we've really made done a great deal to try and coordinate nationally. And obviously there are limits to how easy it is to do that, given that signs are often very context specific. And also Emma's point, I think, about communicating safety messages. Yes, again, it's something that we've definitely registered as being important, particularly given this new audience that's engaging with the outdoors. And part of the challenge there, I think, is finding finding appropriate and useful messaging that we can convey at a high level that's sufficiently generic to be useful across a whole range of activities. So we have another hand up. It's A. McPherson. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, my name's Alistair. I work at Loch Lomond National Park. It's more an observation, I think. I noticed certainly, obviously, when the people's kind of talking about Cairngorms and I assume kind of further south, folk have this kind of issue as well. But I think for people out in the ground, they don't tend to like differentiate between organisations. So sometimes, if you're out there, then you're just a countryside ranger, and so what we can end up perhaps having, I think, is we're all trying to say the same thing, but we're all saying it in slightly different ways. And it's maybe just an observation that, you know, kind of national strategy like that, it could be useful in terms of us making sure that when we set up all these countryside rangers and we work across kind of organisations and in partnership, that our output ends up being the same, so that we're saying the same things to people. I think it's quite easy for us all to go off in different directions. So it's really just an observation. I think that like having that kind of national outlook can potentially, you know, help pull us all together a wee bit. So we all are kind of moving in one direction. Yeah, just perhaps an observation on that front. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Julia, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Julia. I work for the government of Jersey, so I'm quite far away from most of you, but we have the same problems as all the rest of you do. I'm interested in what people's thoughts are on codes of conduct and how effective they are. We've got a number of issues at the moment with sort of recreational access in the form of cycling, mountain biking in particular. And there's been calls for code of conduct, but I'm not convinced that that's the way to go. So I wondered what people's thoughts were about effectiveness.
Okay. Joseph, so did you have your hand up? Joseph Roberts.
Thank you. So I'm Joseph. I work for Natural Resources Wales. I'm one of the exec for ORN as well. Just to respond directly to Julia's comment, I think there, as a document, as kind of behaviour change interventions, I think code of conduct generally are quite problematic, because you try and put a lot of messaging together. So a lot of behaviour change or behaviour insight processes are very specific. So they try and understand the audience, a specific behaviour, and then address it with a specific intervention. Where codes of conduct are really useful is in bringing together a range of partners who don't always agree in the context of outdoor access and recreation, and then to help them come to a consensus about what responsible behaviour is. And then you can use that as a basis for further intervention. So I think they have a really important role. But if you're looking at something that is specifically on its own a behaviour change intervention, it probably won't do the job for you.
Okay, thank you, Joseph.
Okay, there are a couple of hands up, which I'm not sure if those are legacy hands from previous questions or comments. Yeah, okay. No, and just to chip in on some of those points, I think the point about consistency is one that's frequently made, I think. And I guess there are also some challenges there, because while it's important in principle to ensure that the messages that we're putting out don't conflict with each other, achieving really close consistency can be very difficult, given that messages go out across a whole spectrum of different media. It could be social media, websites, blogs, leaflets, face-to-face discussions, videos, and getting the same message in all of those situations is really quite difficult. And the context also influences the message as well. So who's putting it out, what other things they're saying at the same time, what local management action is in place to deal with particular issues. So it isn't necessarily always straightforward, but it's clearly, I think, yes, something that we need to aspire to. Susanna, a new hand up. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. I'm interested in what studies people have done on the effectiveness of their messaging campaigns. There's very little data out there. It's something we all sort of scrimp on, is the evaluation of it. But I just wondered if anybody in this room had any information. Here in the Brecon Beacons, we've been working with a PhD student from Cardiff University looking at behavioural messaging. His PhD paper's due out in the autumn. So I'm happy to sort of share that when it's published. But has anybody got anything in the meantime?
Okay, thanks, Susanna. Catherine, were you coming in on that point?
No, I wasn't coming in on that point. Sorry. Just that you just said that we had to ensure the messaging is consistent across all media, which I absolutely agree with, but it's also important that the messaging is correct. I'm from Scotways, Scottish Rights of Way and Access Society, and Visit Scotland has put out information saying that all visitors must follow signed trails, and that is not correct. And so that messaging is still out there in hard copy. So it's really about, we've had a lot of talk about the need to collaborate and discuss with everything, and maybe that just needs to come out to wider partners that other than the ones that are involved at the moment, because that's misinformation for visitors who may be coming to Scotland expecting that they can go, they have a right to roam, as they rather inadequately call it. But that's just a point about collaboration and communication. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yes, I think it is certainly something that we've not always managed to get the messaging lined up as well as we would like, despite our best efforts. And if something's out there in hard copy, particularly, it's impossible then to rein it back in. So that the best we can do is try and keep our online sources up to date. Catherine, do you still have a hand up? Do you have anything else we wanted to come in again, or is that a leftover hand? Danny, sorry, do you have another point?
Yeah, it's just on the evaluation point that was raised there. I think it's one definitely of interest to me, in that I obviously see Boundary Scotland stats for our different campaigns, and you would see, how many people have viewed our video and where they get through, and how many press cuttings we've had and all that sort of thing. But I feel like there would be scope for somewhere more formal in sharing results of campaigns, because there's not like a central resource to pile them all together, and I'm benchmarking against myself quite often, which isn't massively helpful. And then one step further than that, I definitely feel there's some scope for broader research. They're not just showing how many views we've had in a video, or how many people have seen a tweet or been in the paper, but working the other way around. So from the user, how many users have changed their behavior as a result of something we've done. But that's definitely where we would need academic support. But it'd be hugely useful, because at the minute we are flying blind a little bit on loads of this stuff. We're just assuming that because we've got loads of views, someone's actually done something as a result, which I would guess in many cases is not true. So in time, that would be part of the moving beyond the emergency response. I think it'd be brilliant if we could coordinate ourselves to get a bit of proper research into what actually changes people's behaviours on their outdoor visits.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Joseph, would you like to come in? No, is that a hand down again?
Oh, sorry, I was
Sorry.
on the mute. Sorry. It's an interesting one. I think what Danny sort of raises, the disconnect, or maybe the difference between people viewing a message and people responding to it. And I think DEFRA and Natural England have done quite an interesting piece now. They've integrated questions about the countryside code into their people and nature survey. So that's the national survey. So it may not give you an idea of an individual intervention, but it will give you the kind of, it's a litmus test for awareness of responsible behaviour at a national level. And I think that's a really important thing, because if we are, if this is the intention to try and combine all of those interventions into one national approach, then the ultimate test of that is what the nation is doing. And I think that's where those national surveys are really important. Just to sort of raise one other little point before we get kicked back into the other the room, there's a really interesting kind of dynamic now as well, I think, in post-COVID, and I think it was developing before that people are so respondent to social media. So it's really, whereas people were kind of going to the classic destination hotspots before, there are so many examples now in Wales of the secret infinity pool, the secret waterfall, the secret tree, that pop up on Instagram and instantly become a hotspot without any forewarning. It can happen overnight. You can go from somewhere remote that has no visitors to it being inundated with people without understanding. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic for a communication perspective on how to deal with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe if we've just got a few seconds left, perhaps before we get booted back into the plenary session, I just wondered if perhaps anyone had any thoughts about we've not perhaps touched on the practicalities of reaching some of the more difficult audiences. So particularly thinking here of what are referred to as dirty campers in the Scottish context. And I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts about that. I think using various types of influencer-based approaches has been a fairly common approach, I think. But I just wondered if anyone had any particular sparks of inspiration or experience to share on that, about that. No. Okay. Okay, I think perhaps the other point that was picked up that we didn't maybe, or we're starting to reach, we had some useful discussion on, was about the effectiveness of codes of conduct. And I think certainly the experience we've got, I think all the points about monitoring are well made, and some of the practical difficulties of doing that are recognised too. I think certainly that the feedback on the ground is that from people like ranger services who are trying to interact with people on a day-to-day basis, having a code of conduct to point to is extremely useful as a practical aid.